What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the E for Explicit podcast. I'm Corey, and today we have economist Antony Davies. Anthony is a friend of mine. He's been on the podcast 4 or 5 times now independently. He also comes on with his buddy James Harrigan, who they have a podcast, Words and Numbers. All that information will be in the description below, so you can check him out and follow him on YouTube and his social platforms. This episode is a good one and a relative one because we talk about the current state of the economy. We talk about the war in Israel and Palestine. We talk about the Ukrainian and Russian war and how that's affecting your pockets as Americans. We also cover immigration, college degrees, are they worth it or not, and the political system and what's going to happen in 2024 going into 2025. Who will win the election? You got to listen to find out. Make sure you subscribe, hit that like button, hit the bell notification so you get notified every single time I post new content, and enjoy this episode of the E4 Explicit podcast with Antony Davies. I'll see you next time. Peace out. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the E4 Explicit podcast. And today I have probably my favorite guest of all time that I've had a couple times. Now I think the 4th time by himself. Antony Davies is an economist and a friend of mine. Thank you so much for coming on. If you can kind of give a little background of the people who haven't listened to you on the podcast yet, that would be awesome.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Corey. I describe myself now as a recovering academic. I was a professor of economics, finance, and statistics for 20 plus years, and I've recently left academia entirely. I'm now director of economic research for an investment bank in the DC area.
Wow, good for you. That's awesome. Congratulations on the new move. Very exciting stuff. So let's get right into it. Can we talk about the state of the economy as is? You kind of have 2, I would even say, proxy wars going on. Seems like a lot of people have, air quotes, forgotten about Ukraine because of the new conflict and with Israel and Palestine and Hamas and everything. Can you talk about the toll economically that is having on the United States, if any?
Yeah, well, anytime you have the U.S. involved in or even not even directly involved, but next to some kind of international conflict, it's going to have a negative impact on the economy because it introduces all kinds of uncertainty. What's the landscape going to look like 6 months, a year out? And if, as we're dealing with Ukraine and Russia, if the countries are large oil-producing countries, or they're, as is happening in the Middle East, they're close to some key transport area like the Strait of the Suez Canal, any upheaval there is just magnified in terms of possible impact on the United States. Now, having said all that, the major impact tends to be, putting aside us getting involved, actually, the major impact tends to be one of expectations. We don't know what our energy price is going to look like next year. Are prices of imports going to be higher because of conflict in areas where there's lots of shipping? In those uncertainties will cause businesses and, to an extent, consumers as well, to put off making big purchase decisions. And if they put off making big purchase decisions, that in itself slows the economy. And so you kind of have this weird kind of a situation where the economy slows because it's expected to slow because we don't know what's going to happen.
Right. So what do you mean big purchases? What kind of stuff?
Well, for example, if you're a large corporation, you're looking to make a big investment in something. Maybe it's research and development for a new product, or maybe it's marketing, or maybe it's machinery, or purchase of another company, something large like that. And let's suppose that your projected profits are going to be highly sensitive to your ability to get hold of imports, or to the prices of energy, or something like that. You're apt to say, well, let's just wait 6 months. Let's wait a year to pull the trigger on that to see what happens. And that delay, you take it and you magnify it by a bunch of companies or a bunch of consumers, and now all of a sudden you have all these purchases that otherwise would have happened now being pushed off 6 months or a year.
Right. That makes sense. So, like, I know. I remember you and James have told me because you always hear people complaining about, oh, gas prices are high and oh, it's the sitting president. And I remember you guys always tell me like there's very few things that an actual president can do that will directly affect the consumer's pocket, like gas, right? So, and war is one of those things. I know we're not directly involved per se, where we don't have troops on the ground, but we have a lot of tax-paying money. We have a lot of resources. We have a lot of just U.S. stamped things over in Ukraine and over helping out Israel. So how is that directly affecting us, if at all? Or is it kind of like a trickle-down effect where we're not seeing it right now, but maybe after 2024 or into 2025, we'll start really seeing the impact of it?
Yeah, it's less a matter of what we're actually spending. As people point to it and say, well, we're spending X billions of dollars on this, whatever it is, sending aid or actually sending troops or what have you. And that's, it sounds like a lot of money, X billions of dollars, but in the great scheme of things, it's relatively small compared to the rest of the economy. The larger impact is, as we said before, people's expectations, but also, if you get, for example, Russia involved in something and Russia is a major gas exporter to Europe and Russia decides it's going to shut off the gas to Europe, or something happens and it can't export gas to Europe, and that all of a sudden creates tremendous problems in the European Union. European Union's a major purchaser of American products. That now creates major problems for Americans. So it's less a matter of directly what we're spending, unless you want to talk about something like on the magnitude of World War II, and much more a function of what's going on with oil-producing nations, with nations that are key to shipping lanes, these sorts of things.
Right. Okay. So what is more significant, the war in Ukraine or the war right now that's happening in Israel and Palestine, as far as affecting us?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know that I can answer that. Furthermore, I bet you the answer changes depending on whether you're talking about a horizon of 5 years or a horizon of 20 years.
Right. I know when COVID happened, you had this video that you were kind of explaining like the magnitude of it as far as like the cost that we've endured, or that we not even endured, that we will endure over a long period of time. And like I always think of those things when global things happen. I'm just like, how is this affecting us? And are we fitting the bill for a lot of these things? So can you kind of touch on, like, I mean, think about it, man. We went from a pandemic. We went from like a somewhat of a thriving economy from 2016 to 2020. And then 2020 was just, I mean, no one could have predicted that except for the Illuminati and the elitists. I'm just joking. But then we have that, and then we have Ukraine and Russia, and now it's just like always something that is extremely expensive and profitable for certain parties. But I feel like Americans and everybody else around the world is suffering in a certain way. Can you kind of touch on that at all?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that there's always something, because I was talking to my colleague, James Harrigan, who you mentioned, about exactly that. And I said, James, it appears that something big happens about every 10 years. So we have COVID in 2010. Back up 10 years or 12 years, you got the housing debacle, the financial meltdown in 2008. Back up 10 years from that, you're at about 2001 or 2000 and 9/11. Back up 10 years from that, you're in the 1990s. I forget what was going on in the 1990s. Gulf War. 10 years prior to that, you're just on the tail of you're at the that double dip, huge recession that we had in the 1980s. 10 years back from that, you're at the oil embargo, right, in Saudi Arabia. And so it seems to be every 10 years. Now, why does that matter? It matters because every time something like that happens, and most recently COVID, what do you hear politicians say? They say, we've got to spend money we don't have because of this one-off event. And we all nod and say, yeah, we understand this is a one-off event. We should go ahead and spend. In the case of COVID, we spent an extra something like $4 to $6 trillion. But the thing that we don't pay attention to is that those one-off events seem to happen with pretty good regularity every 10 years, right? And every time they happen, and we hear the politicians argue, well, we need more government because of this thing, you get the more government, but then it never backs off. So every 10 years, you got a jump up in the size of government. You go 10 years, you get another jump up in the size of government. It seems to go on and on like that until you get to where we are now, and the government's got a pretty hefty footprint compared to what it was a century ago.
That's a really good point, actually. Hold on, let me plug in my camera real quick. That's crazy. Hold on for a second. Okay, that's interesting because I know you're a very big fan of government, but not a big, large government, correct?
Oh, I'm not a fan of government at all.
Oh, yeah.
But I will tell you, I think it's necessary. I think it's a necessary evil. And so, like any necessary evil, it needs to be kept in a box.
Yeah.
For God's sake, don't let it out.
Right. Like in check. Like, I mean, like there has to be some sort of like a lot more regulation, I think, of the government. It's just it's too big. And like from what I've learned from you and James, everything, it's more of like this on a state level. Like I think you showed me a map or something like how like the United States would be kind of like broken up, like in territories if it wasn't like it should be smaller portions of government versus like one huge federal government reigning over all, and then the states having their own governments. But that's a really good point that you bring up, that every 10 years there's something. And earlier you said 2010, you meant 2020 and COVID. But just so all the listeners and people don't kill us in the comments. But that's what does that tell you though? Is that like a larger plan? Is that like a larger kind of ongoing long game that the government or the powers that be are playing? Or is that just like a coincidence that every 10 years something happens to where the federal government has to step in and say, hey, listen, we got your back here. We're going to dump some of the hard-earned tax-paying money into this thing that, for the most part, goes away in a relative short amount of time. But to your point, now they have another level of power that they've gotten on top of spending a good amount of money.
Yeah, I don't think it's any kind of I don't think it's deliberately designed. I think just by randomness, you'll get big things like that periodically. Now, people will argue, and I'm sympathetic to the argument, that several of the things I mentioned were the fault of government to begin with, right?
Yeah.
But nonetheless, there are things that evolve, and, there's some probability they'll occur, and so they seem to occur plus or minus about every 10 years or so, right? I think then what you're seeing beyond that, when you see the government ratchet up and not pull back, that's also not the result of any conspiracy or plan. Rather, it's the predictable result of human behavior. And that is, there are some people who want power. They get happiness from power. There are other people, and there's probably a larger number of them, you and me included, who maybe we aren't turned on so much by power, but boy, security is a good thing, right? I want to know that I'm going to have a roof over my head next week. I'm going to have retirement when it comes time, right. All that stuff. And so what happens? You get people like that, and you put them in a situation where they're able to force others to do their will. That is, they're in government, whether they're politicians or bureaucrats or what have you. What are they going to naturally do? They're naturally going to try and expand the scope of their jobs, whether their job as a politician is getting power, whether my job as a bureaucrat is simply running this section of the government. And the bigger this section of the government is, the less the opportunity that my particular job might get, shut down at some point. And so our tendency is to expand this. Now, the exact same tendency occurs in the private sector. The difference is, in the private sector, where does the power, the security come from? It comes from consumers handing over their dollars. And the minute your institution stops delivering value to consumers that they're willing to pay for, the consumers take their dollars elsewhere. And so there's this this force that's pushing back against in the private sector, the institution trying to get bigger and bigger. That force doesn't exist in the public sector.
Right. So they don't have that buffer or that regulator that...
No, you don't have the thing pushing back. Now, people will say in response, but wait a minute, you've got voters. Voters push back. Yeah, not so much, right? Think about the difference between your action as a person in the voting booth versus the marketplace. In the marketplace, I go to Amazon tomorrow and I type in, I want to buy something, and the price is more than what I want to pay, or the quality's not as good, or Amazon says, yeah, we'll deliver it. It's going to be 3 months. I said, heck with that. I go somewhere else. And I can make that decision on the spot as a direct result of what Amazon's delivering to me. Now, I go to the voting booth, right? And as this politician, he's not doing what I want. I voted for him last time. He's not doing what I want. So I'm going to not vote for him next time. Well, at best, I've got to wait 2 years for the next election to roll around. And when it does roll around, I got to remember that, yeah, I'm going to vote against this guy. But more than that, I've got to have 50% of the people agreeing with me.
Right.
That's not the case with Amazon. With Amazon, you might like Amazon. 50% of the people might like Amazon. I don't. I can walk away and take my money. And that hurts Amazon. The politician, he doesn't care if he doesn't get my vote so long as 50% of the other people are voting for him.
Right. That makes sense. Also, I don't know if you want to talk about this, but I feel like I saw a Key and Peele video who they're a pair of comedians. They have a TV show skit that's kind of like Chappelle Show. And they were like doing this video. It's kind of old, but they were making fun of like, yeah, make sure you go out there and you do your vote and you do this. And then electoral college will just take all the votes that are just really suggestions and then really pick the president. So it's like, does your vote really even like matter? And you go through all that stuff. As far as like a federal, like a local vote, a local thing, I think is way more effective and will have more of a direct line of, you know, an instant kind of change that you'll actually see, like your school board and local governments. But the president, I mean, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that when you hear people say, like, your vote doesn't matter?
Yeah, I'll say two things. I'll say, one, they're correct, your vote doesn't matter. And two, your vote shouldn't matter. And here's what I mean by that. First off, your vote doesn't matter. It turns out that we don't need all, however many there are of us, 200 million registered eligible voters, whatever it is. You don't need all 250 million people voting. All you need is about, and you can do the math, something like 200,000. If you randomly select the voters and ask them, who do you want as president, that 200,000, you've got a 99.99% chance that they will select the same person that the full 250 million will.
Wow.
So right off, yeah, your vote doesn't matter. Only about 200,000 matter. Now, what happens is, of course, the politicians don't want a random selection of voters. They want specifically the voters that are going to support them. So you get things like back during the Bush versus Gore election, both Bush and Gore were saying every vote should count. Everybody should get out there and vote. And Bush would point to these particular counties and say, these people haven't been counted, we need to count them better. And Gore would point to these counties and say, these people haven't been counted correctly, we need to count them better because every vote should count. Yeah, but both of them were pointing to counties that particularly would vote for them, right? So they didn't mean every vote should count. They meant that the votes that are going to them should count.
Right.
So that's the first thing. Your vote doesn't matter. Second thing, your vote shouldn't matter. And here's why. The founders were very skeptical of democracy. We call America democracy. America's not a democracy, it's a republic. They wanted to separate government from the voters. And so they would have things like, in Congress, only one of the houses was meant to represent the people. That's the House of Representatives. The other one, the Senate, was not supposed to represent the people. It was supposed to represent the states. And by states, I don't mean the people of the states. I mean the state governments. It was literally representing the states. Why? Because the founders didn't want the people to have two sets of two bites at the apple of electing the representatives and electing the senators. They wanted a buffer from the people. That Senate was supposed to be that buffer. Now we changed that. Electoral college also, it's supposed to be a buffer between the people and the president. The people elect the Electoral College, just like we elect our representatives, and the Electoral College elects the president. Now, if you're skeptical about that, consider that election with Hillary and Trump, where probably the plurality of people didn't want either one.
Yeah.
And then you have the election with Trump and Biden. And I would say the majority of people didn't want either one. Mm-hmm. And now we're set up to do it all over again with Biden and Trump, and the majority, probably a super majority of people don't want either one. How is it we keep ending up in that situation? Or let me say it differently. We likely wouldn't end up in that situation if we took the Electoral College seriously, because the Electoral College would look at this and say, neither one of these are good, let's pick someone else. Right. They could handle that. 250 million voters can't.
So then why? So they did. Okay. So I'm confused. There was a little history lesson here. So if the Electoral College chooses it, why can't they say, yeah, well, this is not, these candidates are not good. Let's have someone else on the docket. Can they do that?
Yeah. Yes, they can. The Electoral College can vote for whomever they like.
So why don't they do that?
Because we've gotten to a point where we've forced them to behave as if they're rubber stamps. Mm-hmm. Now, technically, they could vote for whoever they wanted. Now, in a number of states, it's illegal to do that, which means, yes, they could cast that vote for someone else, and yes, the vote would be legitimate. However, when they return to their states, they'd be thrown in jail.
Oh, wow.
But still, their vote would have been legitimate, and it would have gone to whoever it is they voted for.
Wow. So we've kind of created this monster.
We've created it because we have this perverse love affair with democracy. We think that somehow it's this magic thing. And don't get me wrong, democracy is a good thing within certain measures, but it's not a panacea. You get too much of it and you start to have the problems we have now. And here's an example of how this comes about. We've got a primary in which each party, Democrats and Republicans, elect their front runner. How is it that we keep ending up with choices between two things that nobody wants? The reason is because each party, when it goes for its primary, who's voting? Mostly it's the people within that party. So it's the Democrats voting for the Democrats, Republicans voting for the Republicans. More than that, because it's a democracy, lots of people stay home. So who on average turns out? For the Democrats, it's the hard left. For the Republicans, it's the hard right. And so who do you get as your contenders? You get someone from the hard left and someone from the hard right. And the majority of us in the middle are looking around saying, what in God's name is going on? Well, this is the result of democracy.
Yeah, that's exactly what's happening. And I've noticed, and all the candidates always cater to those people. They're having to cater to the far left and the far right, because they're going to get everybody in between, hopefully. But I feel like most of us, like for me, for example, I know you guys, you're very middle ground, libertarian, I believe. So it's very much more of the right thing to do versus a left or right thing to do. But the way they placate things, it's so far off the scale. You're just they sound crazy when they're talking about stuff. And what's fascinating to me is, and maybe you can explain why this happens, but I don't even know what, was it the Iowa caucus? Whatever just happened recently in Iowa or something, where they all were in a debate or something. And next thing you know, I see all these news articles of everybody's just basically forfeited and just endorsing Trump. And I'm just what happened? Overnight, I forget his name, the Indian dude, the Indian kid, he was awesome. Everything he was saying was so great. He was on point. He was transparent. I was this is exactly somebody who would do very well for the United States and hold certain people accountable and not be so off the cuff and so off the Richter scale like Trump was, and be a little bit more kind of how I like how Obama would always just carry himself and talk and speak. He kind of reminded me of a Trump-Obama vibe. He could get shit done, but he could also be very respectable about it. And he just gave up. And I know it's he got 6%, a very small amount.
Right.
What is that?
Think of it this way. I think you're right, generally speaking, that if you put Vivek up alongside Biden and Trump in a general election, Vivek would win.
Right.
But that's not the way we do it. We have to do it primary first. And in the primary, who's more likely to come out and vote are the people in the hard left or the hard right.
Right.
So Vivek never makes it through step number 1, despite the fact that he would have, if he could have, he'd win step number 2.
That's so crazy to me. Tulsi was the same thing. It just drove me nuts. And the reason why I feel like it's such a machine, it's almost like if the Democratic machine and the Republican machine can't have their candidate that they know is going to bring out these far left and far rights, it's not going to happen. I'll never forget when the night she just destroyed Kamala Harris on national television, they never gave her another spot again in the debates. And she's basically Republican now. She's flip-flop because the Democratic Party has shunned her. And it's to me, that's not democracy at all. You're just basically putting someone else in a corner because you didn't like what they had to say, because they were targeting your probably most profitable and most your larger audience candidate that you're going to have with Biden. And that's exactly what happened. You and James, I called it. I know you wanted Rice in there, I believe, from my memory.
Yeah, Condoleezza Rice, I think, would be a great candidate.
Right, but you guys called it. You were like, it's going to be Kamala Harris because of X, Y, and Z, and it's just a shame because you're right, man. Every 4 to 8 years, we're having to deal with these decrepit, Republican, Democrats, whoever they are, and it's almost you can call it every year. I know the Kansas City Chiefs just won yesterday as this podcast is being recorded, and everyone's saying if the Chiefs win, Trump's winning. If Niners win, Biden's winning. Obviously, that has nothing to do with who's going to be the president, but my money's on Donald Trump winning because the Chiefs, because I don't know a lot about politics. But, that's the kind of stuff that, normal Americans are dealing with. We don't really know a lot. We know enough, but I don't know. I'm kind of going off the rails here, but it's frustrating because I, along with a lot of people, are sick of the same people, the same song every 4 years. And it's you knew the economy was going to be a certain way when the Democrats in office, and you know how the economy is going to be for the most part when a Republican's in office. So why does that happen too?
Well, there's an interesting thing here that you and I might have talked about, but if we didn't, it's going to blow your mind. It will certainly blow your listeners' minds. And that is that neither the Republican Party nor the Democratic Party are governmental institutions. They aren't mentioned anywhere in the Constitution. They aren't legal entities in that. Well, they are legal entities, but they aren't governmental entities. They're nonprofit corporations, right? And so someone founds this nonprofit corporation. It's the Democratic Party, and this is how we're going to operate. And so they do their thing. They bring a candidate to the fore, and the rest of us vote. Now, here's the thing. Those two nonprofit corporations, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, they control who's allowed on the stage at the presidential debates. And of course, what are they going to do? Like any two corporations, they're going to try and corner the market. They don't want competition. And so in the same way as if Amazon and Walmart were the only two companies allowed to sell you products, they would both fight together to keep out any other company because they've got a duopoly on this. That's the Republican and Democratic parties. They won't let anybody else on the stage. And so long as they can keep everyone else off the stage, yes, the Republicans might lose from time to time. Yes, the Democrats might lose from time to time, but always it's going to be one or the other.
Which is why you never see a Bernie Sanders or an independent or a Kennedy. Kennedy's never going to get up there and win because they're not those parties.
Right. Yeah. And remember, to get onto the stage under one of those party banners, you've got to be extreme left or right because those are the people who come out and vote in the primaries.
I need to light a candle in here, man. I'm pissed. This is it's just so frustrating because it's I'm not even a Trumper, but you got me over here. I'm I hope he wins because I'm sick of the last 4 years. And it's now I sound like a radical right-wing motherfucker. It's that's not me. So it's oh my God. It's my blood is just, it gets me boiling. That's so frustrating. What? Do you think that there will ever be that cycle will be broken?
Yes. Yes, the cycle gets broken when you reach a point that the federal government cannot continue the way it is, that it's just become too large. It's unaffordable. And we're coming very close to that now. I've been saying this for 20 years, that be careful, this is coming. And I think we've reached the point now that there's no turning back at this point. It's definitely coming. And my guess is we're going to start to see I've already seen the first cracks, but I think it's going to become apparent to everybody in about 7 years when Social Security hits the wall. And politicians are going to have to do something. It's either going to be a massive restructuring of Social Security, which isn't going to pass political muster. No one's going to stand for that. Or it's going to be substantially raising taxes on the working class to pay for it. They're not going to stand for that. Or it's going to be substantially cutting benefits to retirees. Well, they're not going to stand for that. Or it's going to be just printing money in the background. In effect, the Federal Reserve financing deficit spending to pay for Social Security. That's the most likely scenario, in my opinion. And when that starts to happen, I think you start to see constant baseline 5% inflation. So whereas before 2% was the normal, I think from that point forward, 5 to 7% becomes the normal.
Jesus. Okay, so what does that look like for me?
Well, what it looks like for us is something similar, although not as bad, but more prolonged, that we saw back in 2022 with inflation inflation was at 9%. I don't think we see that much sustained, but I would not at all be surprised if we see sustained in the 5% plus range. So things start to get more expensive, year after year, and, people's wages are going to lag a bit, which means that, yes, you'll see your paycheck go up a bit, next year versus this year, but it's going to happen after you see the price of gas go up and the price of electricity go up and these sorts of things.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something that I know a lot of Americans are struggling with, everything else going up, but their paychecks aren't going up, their salaries aren't going up. And two questions. One, why is that? Why can't, governments say, okay, well, if governments want to be so big and help out so much, why can't they say, all right, well, the minimum wage federally in every single job has to be X? Because I remember back in the day, it was like, $15, a single mom could live off $15 an hour and have 2 kids and or an apartment or whatever it is. No way that's happening now. And then the second part of this is I saw a recent article from or video on TikTok about McDonald's. The CEO of McDonald's was basically kind of saying like, hey, we need to actually reel in our franchisees, because McDonald's used to be a place where people who can't afford a lot can go there for cheap and have a meal. Whether it's good for you or not is whatever. But now, in some states, a Big Mac meal is almost $20. You can go out to dinner in some place like Chipotle or Cava or someplace and get a much healthier meal for like $13 or $14. So how are those two correlate with the inflation of certain things, but also your salary and your pay not equaling that? Because if gas goes up, if housing is going up, if milk and all these things are going up, I paid $12 for eggs, $11, $12 at Target. I had to get eggs randomly for $12. I'm basically paying $1 an egg. That's insane.
Yeah, and I think there are a couple things here. One is be careful of what the problem isn't. And you see this with politicians. I've been watching it for about the past year. They'll point to inflation and they'll blame the corporations. So, well, the problem is corporate profits. And I guarantee you, anytime you see a politician pointing to something and casting blame, look carefully, because 9 times out of 10, it's actually the politician's fault, right? What they're trying to do is divert your attention elsewhere. So yes, it's the case that, you can pick particular companies that are making a tremendous profit and so forth. That's not what's contributing to inflation. What's contributing to inflation ultimately is your money supply growing faster than the production of goods and services. You have more and more dollars chasing the same number of goods or fewer goods. That gives you inflation in the long run. Now, you can look at something like a McDonald's and say, well, they make, tremendous profit, or the CEO makes tremendous profit, or whatever it is. And you got to be careful there. First, when you talk about the corporation and how much profit it makes, people will talk about the dollars. So I don't know what McDonald's profit is, but I think Exxon's profit is somewhere in the multi-billions of dollar range. And people say, look at multi-billions of dollars. Yeah, but hang on. To have Exxon at all, it required an investment of hundreds of billions of dollars. That $1 billion of profit that looks quite large when you look at the dollars is actually a relatively small fraction of the amount of money investors had to put on the table to create Exxon in the first place. It's their rate of return. Exxon's rate of return, I don't know what it is, right? We can look it up, but my guess is it's somewhere in the 5 to 15% range. That's on an ongoing basis. So 5 to 15% return on your investment, yeah, that's reasonable for a company in that area. So that's the first thing. When you think about profits of corporations, stop thinking about dollars and ask what's the amount of profit as a fraction of the equity, how much money that's been put on the table. Second, when you talk about CEOs, and McDonald's CEO is an example here, people will say, well, look at how much look at how much millions of dollars he makes in his salary. Certainly, McDonald's can afford to pay its workers more. I did the math on this maybe 5 or 10 years ago, and my guess is it's not much different now. If you took not just the CEO of McDonald's, but the entire C-suite, right, all the top-level executives of McDonald's, and take their entire pay packages, right, their salaries, their benefits, their options, all of that, and divided it evenly amongst everyone who works for McDonald's, each person would get something on the order of 5 cents an hour. Yeah, because, again, we're looking at this huge amount of money that this one guy makes or these several guys make, forgetting that, yes, it's a large amount of money, but there are so many people working for McDonald's that it's a fraction of a drop in the bucket.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. It's kind of like, it was reminding me of the conversation we had about taxing the rich. A couple episodes, appearances, you said people love to say tax the rich, and if they did, it really wouldn't do anything. It would only do something for that year, and then you can never do it again. So people talk about taxing the rich and taking their billion. If you tax Jeff Bezos and Warren Buffett and Elon Musk and all those things, you can do it one time, but after that, there's no more money left, and it's not a lot of money to begin with, and it's a fraction of the annual budget. Correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So if you took, I know these numbers, if you confiscated 100% of the wealth of all the U.S. billionaires, that money would fund the federal government for about 8 months. And that's extremely optimistic because the billionaires' wealth isn't in cash. It's not like they're sitting on these dollars, right? The vast majority of their wealth is in investments. So to get the money out of them, we'd have to force them to sell their investments, which would tank the stock and bond markets, which in turn would hurt all of our retirement portfolios because all of a sudden they're worth substantially less, right? And you wouldn't collect the amount of money that on paper they're worth. And so how long could you run the federal government? Probably not 8 months, maybe closer to 5, maybe 4. But now here's your bigger problem. You do that once, you say, well, we're just going to do this once, and maybe we can only fund the federal government for a few months, but it's better than nothing. Okay, fine, do it. And I guarantee you what happens next year. Politicians are addicted to money. Next year, they're going to want to do it again, except you don't have any billionaires. No problem, you've got millionaires. Let's go after them. And the year after that, politicians are going to want to do it a third time. But you got no billionaires, you got no millionaires. How about the middle class? Now, you might think, well, the middle class doesn't have that much money. Turns out they do. Take the top 1% in this country. Talk about their income of the top 1%. The income of the middle class, and I'm going to include lower middle class, middle class, upper middle class. So those groups, their income is twice what the top 1% is. How can that possibly be? It can be because although each of us individually have far less income than the 1%ers, there are so many more of us. So be careful about jumping on the rich, because politicians will get addicted to that money, and before you know it, they're going to come after you.
Damn. Yeah, because the middle class, we don't play around. We got money. No, we don't have money. We just have a lot of us. So
we have a lot of us,
game.
each of whom has a little bit of money.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So it's the same kind of thing with the McDonald's CEO, what you were saying. It's kind of like a similar effect.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That is crazy. What were you going to say?
I'm sorry?
Were you going to say something else?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, let me ask you this, because we talked about this also, which is your college degree. This is probably the biggest video I've ever published. It was like not even a minute long. It was you. It was the first time we've met. It was at the place where you're at right now. And it was an in-person interview because COVID ruined everything. And so we were talking about college education and a degree, and mainly like the STEM degrees versus like a political science, or like a was it, I think it was childhood
and family studies.
Yeah. So like, can you talk about that? And has that changed at all? Like, is that degree worth something now? Not to rag on anyone that's got those degrees, first of all, let me just say that. So that's not what we're doing.
Yeah, it changes around the edges from year to year. But generally speaking, anything in the STEM disciplines, also most of the business majors, not general business, but things like finance, marketing, accounting, those majors tend to add to your lifelong salary anywhere from $1 to $3 million, maybe $4 million to your career-long salary. That's on top of what you would have earned as a simple high school graduate. So for those majors, definitely they're worthwhile, right? Go spend, even if you're going to pay out of pocket full price, $100,000 for a 4-year degree. Absolutely, it's worth it. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, you've got things like you mentioned child and family studies, which I think the year we spoke was the bottom of the barrel. There are other ones as well. There's a group of about maybe a dozen college majors that actually are worth less than high school diplomas.
What?
That is, at the end of your 4 years, the salary you can expect to achieve over the course of your career is less than what you could have expected to achieve with a high school diploma. You actually degraded your value.
Yeah, or why? Why? Because that market doesn't call for it.
Well, yeah, it's because of the market. Now, people will look at that and they'll say, well, that's horrible. We should really value child and family studies because those people take care of our children, this kind of thing, and certainly that's valuable. How can you say it's not valuable? And that's not what we're saying. A wage represents not the value of the work you're doing, but rather the value of having one more person do it. And we've already got so many people who are willing and able and qualified to do jobs like taking care of children. We don't need more. And that's why the wage is so low. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, the highest paying major is petroleum engineering, right? What do these people do? Largely, these are people who go out on the oil derricks and do the engineering out there. It's a very difficult job. It's a dangerous job. You're away from your family, right? And it takes a tremendous amount of education to get there in the first place. Because of that, very few people are interested in doing it. And because of that, we're willing to pay a lot of money because we need some more in there.
Right. That makes sense. It's your classic, was it the, like the saying, and like for like the economy, it's oh my God, demand.
It's demand, but there's a thing like this. It's called, in economics, it's called the diamond water paradox. And it goes like this. Diamonds, we all understand, are very valuable, high price. Water, cheap, right? Very low price. And yet, without water, you die. With diamonds don't matter, right? They're just baubles. You don't need them to live, but you need the water. How come the price is so different? The price is so different not because of the value it brings you, but because of the value of having one more. Generally speaking, none of us are dying of thirst. And so having another glass of water doesn't mean anything to me. Consequently, I'm not willing to pay a lot. Diamonds, I don't have many of those. Having one more, that's worth a lot to me. So the price is very high. It's not a function of the value the thing brings to you. It's a function of having one more of them.
Got it. That makes sense. Damn. Also, is supply and demand I was looking for a couple minutes ago.
Yeah, right,
So,
right. It plays out into supply and demand. Yeah.
yeah. So everyone that's making fun of me now for not getting that out, supply and demand. So that, man, I swear, every time I talk to you and James, it's like, it's kind of bittersweet because I learn so much, but I also get so angry because I wish I had just like a magic wand that, well, hey, these smart guys, and Anthony is a very intelligent man. He's speaking facts, because I know none of the stuff that you're saying is like incorrect. It's all correct and it's factual. Why can't we listen to people like this? Can you put your finger on that for a second? Can you like tell me why, or maybe what your gut is telling you of why? Not even us as a United States as citizens and stuff like that, but why can't we just get it right? We know what to do. We know what's right. We know what's wrong. Why can't we do it?
Yeah, and I think there are two things at play here. One goes back to the beginning of our conversation, and that's democracy. That we have decided that everybody needs to have a say, and not just a say, but lots of says in government. That's one thing. The other problem is people have a tendency, they care about others, and that's a good thing. And you see something that's wrong, a family that can't earn enough to feed themselves, or this guy earning a tremendous amount, this guy not, or whatever it is. We see injustices like that, and it bothers us, and it's a great thing that it bothers us. And so we want to do something about it. And it's a great thing that you want to do something about it. But the problem is we care, but we don't care enough. That is, we care to the extent that we want someone to do something, but we don't care enough to be able to cause ourselves to pursue it and think very carefully, what are the ramifications of this thing I propose? So I see this guy's got a lot of money and that guy doesn't have any. And I say, that's wrong. Let's have a law that takes money away from him and gives it to him. And now I can go back to whatever I was doing, feeling good about myself. What did I not do? I didn't take the time and the effort to think through the ramifications of doing that. And I think in that sense, that's part of our problem, is that we care a lot, but not enough.
So what do we
care enough to do something, but not enough to think carefully about what we do.
Right. So like long term, basically, like thinking a long term of those ramifications versus like short term.
Yeah, it's not just long term. It's thinking about the secondary and tertiary effects, not just the primary effect. And in economics, often it's the secondary and tertiary effects that are having a greater impact than the primary effect you were trying to accomplish.
Right. Let's circle back on the election and the state of the economy. Did you see Tucker Carlson's Putin interview? Did you happen to watch that?
I'm sorry, you just cut out.
Did you watch Tucker Carlson's Putin interview?
No, I didn't.
Did you know that he interviewed him?
I heard something about it, yeah.
Yeah. So he went to Russia and he sat down with Vladimir Putin. I didn't watch all of it, but it's pretty long, but I was like, I don't know. I don't know what to take from it, but it's kind of, it's interesting perspective. And it's like, why has no one done this yet? Like we've talked to the president of Ukraine till we're blue in the face, but we haven't talked to the other guy, so it was very interesting. So I would suggest check it out. Like I said, I didn't watch the whole thing. I just saw clips on the internet, but I'm definitely going to check it out probably this weekend. But as far as that goes, do you think that the war in Ukraine and the war that's happening in Israel is going to affect this election? Because in my personal opinion, I think it's obviously going to be Biden and Trump once again, which God help us for both. But I, for some reason, feel that like Biden is kind of Trump's kryptonite, just because he can't get in his head for some reason. Like he can't really, like, how he just treats all the other candidates where he just kind of shits on them and they're like, they kind of go away and they kind of lose in that way. He kind of can't really do that to Biden. Biden's kind of like lost in the sauce a little bit and kind of unaware of those things happening. So it doesn't take the same effect on him as it has other candidates. Can you kind of touch on like if those things have anything to do possibly with our upcoming election?
Yeah, I don't know. I can tell you this. It seems to be the case that in times of war or international conflict, voters tend to lean Republican.
Mm-hmm.
In times of plenty, they tend to lean Democrat. I'm drawing with very broad brushstrokes here. The more interesting thing I'll say is this. I suspect, no one will say it, but I suspect the Democrats don't want to win. If they wanted to win, the winning move for them is to put Hillary in as vice president.
Mm.
Kamala Harris is polling at numbers worse than Congress, if you can believe that. I don't know if she's worse than Congress right now, but she was worse than Congress last time I looked a year or so ago. But she's been consistently around her favorables, or around 30%, 35%, somewhere in there. Biden, I think it's clear to most people, if he seems not to be firing on all cylinders, and certainly I would be hard-pressed to predict that he would be able to continue as he's going for another 4-year term, which means whoever his vice president is, and I think this will be obvious to voters, but if not now, particularly come November, whoever his vice president is, if he were to win, that's going to be who's president before his term is done.
Right.
And people don't like Kamala Harris. On both sides of the aisle, they don't like her.
Right.
So it seems to me if the Democrats wanted to win, they'd put Hillary in as the
Right.
vice presidential candidate. Now, what did the Democrats win by allowing Trump to win? Trump's presidency will, if he did win, I don't know that he would be able to do anything. He's going to be hand-tied by all of this legal stuff that's going on if he isn't immediately impeached when he steps foot in the White House. I don't know, and I'm not saying anything good or bad about him. I'm just saying about factually, he's going to be so tied up in legal loopholes in legal straits because of these cases that are against him. I don't know that he'll be able to operate as president.
So basically, they're like, "Hey, you can have these 4 years that you can't really do much with it, potentially." So then that way, they have a stronger case 4 years from now to say, "Well, look what he did. He didn't do anything. Now you got to go with us," and they'll have probably a stronger candidate by then.
Possibly so.
Damn.
But the weird thing is, to me, you can't tell Biden, if you're in the Democratic Party, you can't tell Biden he can't run. He's the leader of the party. He's the president. Right. What you can do is put pressure on him swapping out the vice president. And it seems to me that given that the majority of Americans don't want either Trump or Biden, to have Clinton in as a vice presidential candidate, I think would draw a tremendous amount of centrist voters over to the Democratic side. But why aren't they doing it? I don't know. The only working hypothesis I can come up with is that they actually want Trump to win.
Wow. That makes a lot of sense. Have you heard about like Michelle Obama being on the ticket in not this year, but the next election?
No, I'm sorry, you cut out again. Have I heard about Obama being on the ticket?
Michelle Obama.
No, I haven't heard that.
Yeah. I don't know. I was like on a podcast, but they were talking about like a Michelle Obama potentially running down the line just because of the clout that she's obviously Barack's wife.
See, we're in this very weird space where you could almost pick anybody.
Yeah.
Even someone at random off the street and slap a Democrat or Republican imprimatur on them, and that person would win because nobody wants either of I shouldn't say nobody. This vast majority of people don't want either one of the supposed candidates.
Right. Yeah. The middle pack definitely want a legitimate candidate. And to your point earlier, those people can't get past step one, where they would probably win in step two, which is very unfortunate. Man. Do you have anything else you want to talk about? Any positive note that we want to?
Any positive note? Yeah, I'll give you something positive that we tend not to think about that much. And that is, for all the problems that we see, and we've talked about a number of them, political problems, economic problems, so on and so forth, we tend to lose sight of the fact that the United States is a tremendous economy. We have tremendous infrastructure. Yeah, okay, we have problems. We understand that. But generally speaking, we've got tremendous infrastructure. We've got tremendous well-educated workforce. We have entrepreneurs doing their thing. We've got tremendous innovation going on. In terms of being an economy, we're an absolute juggernaut. The government is another problem. So to the extent that we're being held back, it's because of the government and the problems it's created. To the extent that we're at each other politically and socially, I would argue it's again because of the government, right? Or maybe the two parties. But generally speaking, take that section away, and you've got this tremendous group of people. We don't agree on everything, but generally speaking, we move in the same direction in a peaceable manner. And that is, in the history of Homo sapiens, almost an unprecedented thing to see.
Right. No, I agree with you. I wholeheartedly agree with you. I think for the most part, the majority of people all have the same intentions, and they're all very good. We have some apples, some sour or rotten apples in there for sure.
You do. And I'll remind everybody that who do you see on the news? You never see the reasonable people. Oh. You see the sour apples, right? Ask yourself, when was the last time you saw something on the news about a plane crash? And then tell me, when was the last time you saw a news headline that 858 flights landed safely today? You never see that, but that happens every single day.
Literally. No, that would help with my anxiety of flying for sure, because I hate flying and it gives me anxiety, but it's because I go down these rabbit holes of, well, this plane crashed in 1987. This happens all the time, and it doesn't actually. Man, that's so true. I'm going to go back to potentially negativity for a second. I completely forgot to ask you about your take on the immigration there, or what's happening in Texas, if you have any insight on it at all. And also, because I know you're pro-immigration to an extent. I
am. I mean, I get the problem when people say, look, I'm for immigration, I want legal immigration. And I can agree with that with a rather large footnote. And the large footnote is, I think many people who say I'm for legal immigration don't understand how incredibly difficult we have made legal immigration. Now, I get I get where you're coming from viscerally, which is, look, I don't want people coming in here who are just going to be, siphoning off social programs, or they're criminals or whatever. And I think that's what a lot of people mean when they say I want legal immigration. But we have drawn an incredibly high barrier to legal immigration, such that basically the only people who can come in are people who are either independently wealthy or have access. Because we tell them, look, you want to be legal, you have to live in this country for X number of years, and while you're here, you can't work. How am I supposed to pull that off, right?
Yeah, no, that's very true.
Generally speaking, I'm for immigration, and I would remind everyone that think about what it takes for someone to leave their home, probably their family, probably their culture, to a place where they don't understand. Maybe they don't understand the language, they don't understand the culture, they have nothing, they don't know what's going to happen. All they know is they want to go there and make a better life for themselves. That's an entrepreneur. That's exactly how we describe an entrepreneur. I don't know what's out there. It's a huge risk, but I'm going to do it because it's going to make my life better. That's who we want. So generally speaking, there are exceptions, but generally speaking, immigration itself is a filtration. It filters in it filters in entrepreneurs. That's what we want.
Right. No, I remember you telling me that a couple of years ago, where some of the biggest companies that we have and the biggest things that we have as far as, inventions, all immigrants.
Yeah, created by immigrants. And people will talk about immigrants taking jobs. You can do the numbers, which I've done on several articles I've written, and the number of jobs immigrants create dwarf the number of jobs that they occupy.
Right, 100%. That was positive. That's a positive note. We can end on that. Yeah. It's getting late, and I'll let you have the rest of your evening. Anthony, where can people find you if you want them to?
You can find our podcast, Words and Numbers, at all your podcast players, and check out my YouTube channel on YouTube, of course, Antony Davies.
Yes, awesome. Thank you, Anthony. I'll put all those links in the description as always. And like I said, as always, thank you again for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate you, and I love listening to you. I know my listeners always ask when Anthony's coming on, so I appreciate you coming on again.
Thank you, Corey. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And that's another episode of the E4 Explicit podcast. We'll see you next time. See you guys.